And welcome back to the Intrinsic Minds podcast once more. Um, Gio, how we doing today?
Doing good. It is, I don't know about you, but is it because I don't know if it got that far down south, but is it all smoky down in Florida at all?
No, I saw I got the updates from all my Jersey
Bro,
people.
it's it's
You got like a
bad over
massive
here.
fire in Jackson.
Well, not that. It's all the smoke that's coming from Canada for the
Oh,
past
that too? That's ironic.
yeah, the past 2, 3 days. It's funny too. I have a picture of it just driving home today. It got worse. It dissipates and gets worse like down here, like down at the shore. But then my girlfriend sending me videos because she was, you know, working over there in Brooklyn and shit. And then even in Staten Island, it's so bad. And you go outside and it just smells like fire.
Wow, I wonder if there's definitely a combination there too, because that Jackson fire is pretty big.
Yeah, now that's just there's been another fire not that long ago. There was a fire before that and shit too. So yeah, and then you got all the conspiracy people going crazy about the whole fires in Canada, and they're showing videos of these drones that are spitting out fucking fuel that's on fire into the woods, and it's like, I'm like, are you a firefighter? Are you a controlled wildfire detective over here?
Yeah.
Do you understand how controlled burns work? Yeah. But anyway, I didn't even entertain it.
I don't, dude. I have no intention to entertain any of it anymore. It's like I'm just so far over it and so done. And if people have paid attention, I think they've slowly recognized that we have not much interest in the conspiracy end of things. It's all there, and
Yeah.
but I'm just at this point way more interested in the knowledge factor and in wisdom factor, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to gain knowledge. I'm not just trying to be a detective and figure out who the bad guy is or what conspiracies or what and all that. They're out there and they're real. They're very real. And I'd rather know the knowledge and wisdom of if these people did know something opposed to what they're doing. And I think
Mhm.
that's where I get like the whole personal empowerment mindset opposed to who's taking my power away. I think it's going to be
Mhm.
aware of both, but I'd rather empower myself through knowledge and wisdom at this point, and now going this far with astrological study, esoteric study, and all of that. You have so many opinions coming from the outside on what's good, what's bad with that stuff, and
Mhm.
what camps and all that believe in what this and that. But I just rather in a neutral place, sit in the middle, understand the knowledge to the best of my ability, discuss it and talk about it, and recognize all the archetypal playouts, because life is a beautiful thing if you allow it to be. And I think I wouldn't be following my own principalities of how I see reality. Of if my mind is constantly looking for those bad things or those things that are trying to get me and all of that, then I'm going to constantly attract that information and attract those people, and it's going to bring more of it into my sphere. And if you're out there and you believe in the 5D, and you believe in that we manifest our reality, that if you are focused on just the politics or just the conspiracy or just the black magic that is the occult and all of that, that's the lens you're going to see it all through.
Mhm.
And to an extent, I mean, it could serve you, but only up to us. I think just there's a glass ceiling on it. And people don't recognize that, and then they could get themselves into a loop, right? So, and that's why we've,
Yeah.
really kind of turned the corner here and saying, I think we're going to really, focus on more astrological talks and even psychological, esoteric talks and all that, and whatever comes up, and if there is some conspiracy or thing that needs to be brought up, of course,
Mhm.
but
Well,
not
no,
everything is also a
I
conspiracy
think
either.
I think what we've kind of found also through this is like my thing now is just to be like, if we're gonna ask who the bad guy is, we have the answer. And this is gonna sound really weird, but you are, we are, I am. You're the bad guy.
Yep.
That's it. It could be you're the bad guy because of your negligence, the bad guy of because of the imbalance or whatever. But no matter what, since we've learned through this, it's a lot of it is this reflective perception of things and stuff too. And it's not to demonize yourself either in that sort of way, but In reality, that's just what it is. It's, we're a lot of things are imitated based off of shared, psychology, shared emotions of things, and shared idea construct like that. And we've seen that more and more so to be true. If you haven't, then maybe there's a little deeper looking into things than you do, but maybe you should shift that perspective. But I think this plays hand in hand in the series that we're doing, and especially what we're going to be talking about today, which is the moon, all the constructs of the lunar principle, and archetypal paths of it, the mythological allegorical implications, that have been discussed about it and everything, and just the actuality of it, and how it kind of even physically plays a role in the certain areas that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, well said. And you said reflective, right? The reflective property, and that is the moon, right? Because it reflects the energy that is placed upon it, and mostly the solar principle in astrology is what the lunar principle is reflecting, right? So in your chart or in anything else, and during any cycle, the moonstral cycle is reflecting that of the energy that was seeded within each lunation process. Every month or every month, you have a lunation process where something is seeded, and then something is birthed, and then something teeters off to start the next cycle again. And that is the archetypal play out of the moonstral cycle, or the moon. Fun, quick sidebar too. I learned that the story of Humpty Dumpty is actually the story of the moon cycle. Sat on the wall, right? Full egg on the wall, and then it cracks and falls and picks it up and puts it back together again and rises back up again. So there's a little allegory for you. But yeah. And I mean, also when it comes down to it, why, and we don't really have to explain why anymore, but why my belief system is like something like the astrological understanding, and saying just even knowing your sun and moon sign, you're learning energetic playouts, right? You're learning these archetypal playouts through energy and all of it. When Gio's saying, and this is what I get from what you were saying with how we're the bad guys in a way, is everything is part of the mirror effect in this reality, right? So everything's playing out through, like, it has to be formed in an energetic form first. It has to be a frequency first and a vibration. So whether it's a day in the year, or whether it's your natal chart, or whether it's anything else that has a birth time, and then yet the state of the energetic resonance of that specific thing, whether an event or anything else, that energy's there, and then it has to play out into reality, right? So all this conspiracy and all of the things playing out where Gio says we're the bad guys is more so just saying that this is the energy that was sitting in the unconscious of humanity, as Carl Jung would call it, the collective unconscious. So all of these things playing out potentially could be the archetypal playouts of all the things accumulated up to this point by humanity, and now it's being kind of let out, like the Pandora's box has been opened up, and now all the energetic forms that are there sitting in the soup of the ether has to play out. And that's the beauty of following an astrological transit, is you're getting a glimpse of what potentialities are going to be in that soup in that particular point in time for the energy to reflect back out to us. And then we live and experience those things. So with the transits or natal, you are watching a archetypal and energetic play out of what's already sitting in there. And the only way to, transmute or transform that energy is to, one, be aware of it, and to make the decision to change it. But you can't change something that you're not aware of, right? So the one thing that the conspiracy community is doing is great, is it's awareness. So that is a part of the empowerment, but to only be aware of a problem, to only be aware of a cancer in your body, to only be aware of teeth falling out because you have a mineral deficiency or something like that. If you're not aware of that in the first place and see the physical play out, you would never know that you had a sickness or an illness, or that there was these things lying in the unconscious of humanity. And the fact that they are playing out, they are being released. Now they have to play out, and it's our choice now to see that thing and say, okay, this is being reflected back to me now. And this is what is triggering my emotions. This is what's getting me to think a certain way. Now that I'm aware, I have that choice to say, I'm going to decide to transmute this and bring it into a higher state. And, you know, the lunar principle is the most, I guess, I won't say common, but it's the most intense because it changes so rapidly and you could see it. And that's why if you know your sun or where the sun is, and you know what season it is, you'll have a great idea of what's going to be out open in the conscious realm and what you could see and what you can sense and what you could. But with the moon, it's about the internal subjective world, about this is what you're probably going to be feeling. This is what you're going to subjectively be experiencing. And when we're hyper aware of it, we have the ability now to change that. Right. And Gio, let's bring you into it. You're experiencing a lunar transit at the moment, an energetic reflection at the moment with Saturn over your moon.
Right. Yeah. And I think that can play many different ways and stuff too. But it's something that triggered me that you just said too was like we constantly hear about the moon being feelings or emotions and stuff like that. Well, I want to take an approach to be like, well, feeling and emotion is not necessarily one and the same thing. I think feelings trigger emotions where, it's more of a sensation, which could be more represented by Venus, if anything, and therefore, those are more of, the feelings are more of these surface level type, whereas emotion is more of a long-term accumulation of something being received, right? Mm-hmm. The reception of it. So that would be more so of the moon, mm-hmm. So that's how we could see it. And you said the whole thing too, is like, if we're going to go based off of the cycle of the moon too, and, observe our chart and understand the archetypes in that way and stuff too, then the moon, the awareness of the moon in that sort of sense, and its movement, and even where it's moving in our own personal charts, even our own moon and stuff, that can, I feel like, give us more of that immediate awareness as to when we're not, oh, this is how I'm going to be feeling. No, it's whatever kind of occurs ends up creating a response or a feeling. It's just how you're going to internalize that. Now that's your moon. That's your moon. And then, but that internalization can be played different ways through different aspects and different degrees of where other planets are and stuff, and how they're playing an effect into that. And, something I also think too, is that like, when, when there's like this reflection of the ego, and when it comes to that whole thing, like I said, of the emotion and the moon and the receptive part of it and stuff like that too, it's like the self-image and the ego will be reflected on the moon sign in relation with the rising sign. But like the rising sign is going to be more so of how other people are seeing you play out some that, receptive quality of that feeling that's now transforming into an emotion and stuff like that too, where you're going to internalize more of that feeling and not going to see the same side. But you may be conscientious of what's on the outside, and you may be even inflating that. And I think that's what creates a lot of the problems when it comes to our emotions, when we become too emotionally involved or not emotionally involved enough, or we don't know how to process our emotions. And I think those are the things that the moon, and because of how immediate it is through its cycle, when you learn all the aspects of astrology in this way, and then the archetypes of each and every sign, the planets and all this, and then even the transits and stuff, then you can have more of that. Like, it's like an addict, right? What do they tell an addict to do? One step at a time, one day at a time. Sometimes it's 1 minute at a time. Well, like the moon can be that process for somebody who maybe needs that, who feels like they don't have control of their emotional response to things, or right away they take in some sort of feelings through some sort of outer event and internalize it, and it spirals or something like that, or maybe it just deflects off them and it does nothing. It just ends up in a black hole. This is a way for you to view it, to look at it, and we'll go into that more, but I think that's just something I want to differentiate if we're going to talk about the moon and emotions and feelings. And like, let's kind of separate the words feelings and emotions, because it could be easy to get lost in the sauce with that.
Yeah, I mean, feelings, I think, pass by where emotions are, you can consider them more vibrational states. There are things that have been embedded. When you have an emotion, your energy's in motion, you're having something that could be triggered, but it could have been laying dormant, where a feeling kind of passes. Like, oh, I felt this way. But feelings, like anger, right? You get into a fight with someone that you're close to and all that, and you say some shit and you say stuff that you don't mean and all that you had a feeling. That wasn't an emotion. The emotion is there, the underlying state and that attitude, which that's a great key word, I think, for the moon too. It's more so the attitude that you like the internalization, which then reflects back outwardly, an attitude that would be more of the externalization of that internal integration of whatever it is you're experiencing, whatever, if it's a feeling or if it's this elongated vibrational state, that attitude is the current form that vibrational state is, right? And that's how you're handling all that stuff. And that's why if you pay attention to, say, whether it is the aspects in your chart, like I have Jupiter conjunct the moon in Cancer. So you could look at that in many ways, but that planet's playing, they're working together because they're basically almost partile, right? They're almost at the same degree. And I could have big emotions. I could also indulge in my emotions or anything like that. Like when it comes to, you say Venus, right, is connected to the moon. I could be indulging in the obsession of a TV show, right, or something I'm emotionally connected to. It could be a person, and that could cause that. But on the other side, that energy, that attitude of, say, the Jupiter Moon combination could be more of a jovialness, more someone who's trying to bring a lot of positive energy, and in Cancer, trying to nurture that positive energy and give it a big hug and trying to wrap it around and all that. But it is that moon is that attitude, where the feeling, I feel like, also would come from more so the transit or the transitory aspects of the moon, where that, the moon's going to go through every sign within 28 days. And that's going to cause a bunch of feelings, not a bunch of emotions, unless something has happened. Like when I brought up just before with your Saturn and moon, the transit of Saturn going over your moon, where that lasts for a long time, and you're going to accumulate a lot of feelings from this transit because it's going to sit on your moon for a long time, and you're going to have a lot of feelings within that. But then when that transit passes, you're going to now have developed new attitudes or new emotions or new vibrational states that you now have, digested and integrated into the self. So I'm with you on that. Like
like what feelings did you,
right?
Yeah. What feelings came up, and you're going to observe those, and then you're going to psychoanalyze. And then in that passing state, it's going to be, what feelings did you nurture? And now they're going to have some sort of lasting, resonance on, your own, persona and your reflection on things and stuff too. And like, I think that's a quality of when looking at the moon that should be observed is that no matter what, that's, everybody thinks like the moon, the quality of it, and it, this nurturing receptiveness and all this stuff and shit. Well, that can play in any sort of manner. Like, it's the same thing. Like, the feeling, the Venus part of it could be like, I got a bad feeling about this. I got a bad feeling about this situation and stuff like that. But now what you're doing is you're internalizing that, and you're analyzing it over, and like, doesn't mean the feeling is valid or right. Your emotions are valid, but the feeling doesn't necessarily mean, and everything actually turns out completely opposite of what you thought. And maybe you made yourself look like an ass because you really internalized the emotion of it and got real, dark with it or something like that. Well, that's the thing. It's the moon is you however your moon sign is going to reflect that, of course, with other aspects and shit, but it's really going to show how you kind of handle that feeling and stuff. And that's the thing. It's like, you don't want to over nurture the things that don't need to be nurtured. It's like sitting there and being like, well, I'm going to pull some weeds out of my garden and shit, but I'm just going to throw them back on top. Eventually those are going to fucking root back into the garden. Whereas you need to actually get rid of them, the same way where it's like, I'm going to, I'm going to feed this, I'm going to give this one, this quality of water and shit. And this one, I'm just not going to do anything to it. Well, that's what you're going to produce in that sort of sense too. And I think the moon has this big part to play on security. Yes, emotional security, but that plays into everything else, because if we think about it, the sun, like we've talked about, is that creative, productive energy, whereas the moon is that receptive part of it. It's the womb in that way. It's going to kind of manifest and put into form that energy and stuff through a certain quality. Not only that, if we want to look at it in like kind of like this mystic type of way, when it comes to all the planets and everything and how they radiate some sort of, let's just say, light in some sort of way, no matter what, they all have to pass through the moon. Like, it all has to pass through the moon in some sort of way. Even in the real ancient Kabbalistic way, when you look at this, when you look at the Kabbalah and all the Sephiroths and stuff, the pathways that they go, no matter what, everything passes through the moon before it gets to the Malkuth, or before it gets to the Earth. So there's other things that are showing us that to be true, and therefore why not let that be the first thing to work on? And then, like I was saying, the moon was going to deal with a lot of the emotions of security, feeling secure in what we do and stuff. And we can be forming through our emotions whatever is being reflected from our moon sign, I guess you could say too. There's more, obviously, everything else that's going to play into it, but I'm just trying to keep it basic. Whereas, like, that's the first thing you can look at too. The same way, like I said, it's like, yeah, you may have something happen to you, and you have a certain way of intaking and have a response, and maybe you can look at, oh, okay, well, how is the outside world going to perceive whatever it is that I'm taking in, and my emotional response to that feeling and stuff like that. Whereas your moon is going to show you more so of that whole thing of how you're actually yourself identifying with that feeling and stuff, not the outer identity that's going to be seen, but it's also conscientious of what the outside is projecting as well. So yeah, I think that's a big thing. And it's funny because alchemically, and even just through the archetypes and everything, and the rulerships of the moon and the domicile and the exaltation stuff like that, like, it actually will reinforce that whole thing of security, stability in those ways. But I know we'll get to that.
Yeah, well, and yeah, inner stability and security is definitely a key part of it, and it's not only on the inner but on the outer, right? So in the moon will always play that archetype. You have the exoteric and the esoteric, where on the outside, it is more so of like maybe the childhood experience that you had, where if you felt secure or you felt insecure, or if you felt like you were in a home or in a broken home, your moon sign and the aspects to it are going to play out exoterically, where you'll see the symbolization of that moon energy that you have. And then on the inner side of it, when you're in, it's also then how the interplay of it is how you're internalizing all that energy, and then how you also transmute it. And that really, to me, is the most important part of astrological like delineation of, you're using this information to see it on the outside, then use it to internalize it, to then transmute or change or become aware, to get off the wheel of karma with it, and get it to its most highest expression. And your moon sign is that subjective inner experience on how you're going to deal with that relationship of security that you have to yourself, to your family, to the world, to your home, and how all that stuff interplays. And that's why it's part of the big three, right? Because your sun is how you're going to think about the symbol, just using nature, right? You walk out, the sun is projecting its light, it's growing things, it's creative expression, all that. And the moon is when everything gets quiet and receptive and where you're taking in the day. And, it's reflecting light back to you from the day. It's the accumulation of the day. And then once that moon sign then goes back out again and the sun comes up, you've now renewed or refreshed. How much have you transmuted that lunar energy, everything that was reflected to you or placed upon you during the day? And that's how you would use that archetype. And so and this is part of the big three, right? So if you know your sun and you know your moon, you're 2/3 there of really knowing the most important aspects to yourself, and everything else happens to just integrate within those three. And when you were talking before about the, you're saying Venus is related to the moon and all that, and they are the feminine principle. If you have Taurus and Cancer and they do sextile, that is a beneficial and benevolent angle there. But you also have, say, you can use all the personal planets as part of the process, because if you're internalizing feelings or creating emotions, Mercury's there to go down into, Persephone, right? You're supposed to go down into the depths of your emotions. Mercury's there to be indifferent to it all and analyze it and bring anything up from that realm to bring to the higher realm. So if you think about it, and then Mars is going to be how you slash all those demons, right? How you fight that internal war that you have going on. And so all your personal planets will serve the sun, the moon, and the rising sign is kind of more just setting the stage on how you're going to get through that journey and what places in life you're going to have to deal with those things. I happen to have Mars in the fourth house of home and inner security, which is ruled by the moon. So I'm going to be a warrior at home, or I'm going to be a warrior for the family. I'm going to have that Martian thing of like, if you come into my home, you will respect it. And if you do not, the Mars now comes out. So in that sphere, it's playing out that personal planet of mine, where I have Venus in Aries, and that's more of, and I have a quintile, I luck out, but quintile is kind of this natural way to deal with it. It's a natural talent, but usually Aries squares Cancer, which is where my moon is. And there's going to be tension there between my feelings or my passions and desires and what makes me feel secure and what makes me feel so comfortable, and my relationship with my family and all of that. My moon actually squares Geo's Mercury. So there is even there could be tension there on sometimes maybe on how he says something and then what I feel about it, unless you know that you've transmuted it and you know how to deal with it and you're aware and you've internalized these energies to then bring out the highest expression. So now you could go to an astrologer or learn to look at your own chart and say, okay, where is this lunar principle? What sphere and what house does it sit in? What sign is it in? Because that sign's going to express what you're going to need with that energetic drive or that expression that it needs. And then you see it in the house and you go, okay, this is where I feel most secure and comfortable. Is it in the realm of career? Is it in the realm of partnerships? Is it in the realm of transformation and psychology? Is it in family? And you could see all that. And when you're aware of it now that internalization process becomes a lot easier because you're bringing this way to see the archetype into your consciousness, and you're able to then integrate it into your consciousness and do something about it with your sun. And that's how they work together. So you start to notice on how the chart and especially all the personal planets really need to work together. And your big three are the ones that you're going to benefit the most on your transcendental experience of becoming a higher, a human being or a state of consciousness and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even the things that are going to represent, struggle or conflict and stuff, and in certain ways, like those have to be viewed as beneficial as well. Like there's going to be things that are going to be aiding factors, but yes, there's going to be more of like the hard parts of it, some things that aren't considered necessarily beneficial, but overall they are beneficial if you, like you were saying, know how to transmute them and stuff.
Mhm.
Because the same way where the moon can nurture good things, like I was saying before, yes, you can nurture negative things as well and stuff too.
Mhm.
There could be the excess of emotionality and reactivity and stuff, the moodiness, dependence, unwillingness to want to grow up, shit like that,
Right.
or wanting to help everybody and stuff. And maybe some people don't, you're actually doing them a disservice and stuff. So it once again plays on that whole balance beam of is something too much or is it not? Even like when you were saying before, like the whole Mars square the moon and stuff, like, and dealing with the home and, roots and, also learning how to, what emotions need to come up in a dominant factor, and where to assert those things or those emotions, or where to assert yourself even in the home and stuff. Like those are different ways to even look at that too.
Right.
But yeah, I feel like there's, compared to like a lot of other planets and stuff, I really feel like the moon definitely is probably a real key kicker into, because a lot, what we manifest is majority based on of how we're perceiving things and how we're processing them. And it's like, if we're going to be an emotional doom and gloom type person and stuff, most of the time that's what you're going to receive, but also you can't be too airy fairy, everything's all right and stuff like that, because then you're going to live in a delusion, and you could see that represented through all different archetypes of the moon and different signs and stuff too. So it's like the moon kind of has to, like, if the moon's ruling your emotions, and your emotions are going to propagate your actions, and your actions are going to propagate your reality, and the realism of what comes into form and is manifested and stuff too, then you kind of got to learn how to like almost like inherit all those qualities and stuff too through the moon in a sort of way, which, like what I say before, is that the everything, all the celestial rays of everything comes through the moon. Even if we were to look at it on, maybe, that cosmic platform of, what we're told is how everything's set up and stuff too. Not going to get into that, but that's another way to understand that. It's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I do need to, if I'm into astrology in this way, maybe I do need to look really into the moon first before trying to go off in other areas. Because I've, even just me for myself, like revisiting this notion about the moon has helped me kind of see and be like, wow, you know what, I'm starting to see how a lot, if I can kind of focus on those parts of myself and, the internal, and, understanding that a lot of it isn't, because that's the other thing too. The moon, you constantly hear, oh, it's the unconscious or the subconscious. Like, yes, but it's actually more conscious than we think. Like it's more consciously being flowed and observed by ourselves and by our ego, and is being transformed into our outer expressions in a way too. So there's a very conscious aspect of it too. So when we take in consideration all the highs and lows, the ebbs and flows of the moon and stuff, which that's what it does. I mean, the tides, they come in and out and everything, our internal emotional waters and tides, and our energy goes in and out and everything in that sort of sense too. It could recede, it could retract, and maybe that's what's necessary. Maybe you need to kind of give the excess off as well. Like you got to look at it in that energetic sense. And when you put it through all the different archetypes, you can kind of see what you need to take with it. So you can empower your emotional security and stability to let it better reflect and emanate what you need to, how you need to think, maybe you're thinking with just constantly just, if everything's filtered through your emotions, and that's also not a good way to if you're really trying to come up with logical, rational things sometimes,
Mhm.
but also it's not to take complete emotion out of it. But so there's that. And, there's, it can help you with your thinking. It can help with your actions. And those are the things that are going to actually, let's be realistic, because we live in a physical world. Those are the things that are actually going to have a more practical, tangible way of showing up and help reinforce what you just processed with your emotions. And it could also change your perception and your opinions on things that you take in, that the feelings that you have on, which, like we just said before, transmutes into certain emotions. And maybe things will take on more importance than others that need to, and maybe things won't be as important as other things. And I think that's going to help in that healthy balance of flow of trying to find that emotional security.
Yeah. And if you brought up manifestation, right? So I think the moon would be that inner attitude, that inner vibrational state that you're going to, naturally kind of express. And I think with the word unconscious, I just think I agree with you on it. I think it's only unconscious because people don't pay attention to it, that they choose to kind of repress it. And or depress, because repression is you don't even understand that you've done that. But depression is kind of just like, you're aware of it and I feel this way, but I'm just not going to acknowledge it. When you acknowledge it, it's now conscious, right? And now, so when it comes to manifestation terms, if you were to use just the sun and the moon, your moon is how you're going to take everything and internalize that attitude and how you're going to take your vibrational states, your ebbs and flows, and what you're going to do to integrate that into your daily conscious mind to then use to drive and create with the solar energy, right? Because the moon's always reflecting. So they interplay with each other, right? So your vibrational state on the internal is then going to create your actions on the external, and in your conscious mind, you'll make conscious decisions with that because you've consciously internalized or transmuted those energies. When yet, if you are unconscious of it, now these unconscious drives that you have sitting in your lunar space is going to cause certain energies to then vibrate. And then now that leads to decisions, and it leads to conscious activities that aren't so conscious because they're unconsciously driven from the lunar principle that you have. So it's important to know both. And I would say lunar, you were emphasizing how this is one of the most important parts of it. And that's because the lunar principle is probably affecting the solar one more than the solar is affecting the lunar, meaning the moon's supporting, right? It's the mother or the woman in the household. If you were to use this traditional way of seeing all of this, is the mom or the feminine principle is there to be soft and warm and receptive to the male principle. So then the male can then go out and be energized and be supported and all that to go be the male energy, to go drive out into society and go make the money or go do this and that. And I know a lot of women nowadays want to be the solar principle and all, and they want to be the masculine, or they want to embody that as well, which there's no problem with that. But when you look in nature, or you just look at a simple electrical socket of a male and female, the male and female part of anything out in nature or that's used, that's not just say a human being, it's just out in nature. They have their purposes, they have their places. And when things are working in cohesion and they work in a natural, integrative way, and they're properly placed and all of that, nature tends to be the perfect machine. And if we abide by those principles and use it, now apply it to the astrological energies, if you have the inner wife or the inner feminine principle who is soft and receptive to the male principle in you, and you're creating the proper energetic vibrational states, then you are now going to be able to then take that solar energy and go create what it is that you actually want to do. And I'll use as a personal example, I have a moon in Cancer, but then I also have a sun in Gemini, two pretty opposite signs. They say the signs that differ the most, it's not the opposition, because the opposition of an energy is the same energy. It's just the other spectrum of that expression, where the signs that are next to it are the blind spots. So I have a moon in Cancer and a sun in Gemini. I want to just go have fun and be flighty and talk and this and that. But then my moon's like, yeah, but I want to be held, and I want to feel, and I want to, emotionally be involved. And Gemini doesn't want anything to do with that. So I have to now battle that if I don't know how to integrate, or if I don't know how to transmute, or allow the wife to work for the husband and allow the husband to work for the wife. So, for example, the Gemini energy to bring home the soft, receptive, perfect place for the Cancer moon to feel at home and to express itself to the fullest. And then with the Cancer energy there to recharge and this and that and be more internal, to take those emotions and bring it back out to the Gemini and say, now you're ready to go. Now you're ready to go back to work. Now you're ready to express or create and all of that. And so then how can you use these archetypes and these principles, masculine, feminine, solar, lunar, and learn to integrate it into your consciousness? And that's the beauty. That's the beauty of using this science, is you're getting the intangible metaphysical view on how to be the highest form of yourself, opposed to the idea that it's just this exoteric, conspiratorial, occult, black magic, witch having, ritual inducing, and all that. And all that stuff is part of it. But wouldn't you find it more on the empowerment side of things to use this to bring yourself up and to see self first, and then to place yourself out into society and into life and become your highest form? And that's how I've personally seen it as so useful to know, like, one thing about being the dramatic conspiracy theorist or anything else, or use it to, and to manifest material things that aren't so spiritual. You could do that, and that's fine. It's part of, I feel like it's part of the whole sphere of nature. Like, that's how, and this is how energy works. Astrology just happens to be the metaphysical home base for that. So I know we just spurred it out a lot there, but yeah, the feminine and masculine principles here of the sun and the moon, and knowing them in your own chart, is just going to do you absolute wonders. And next week, I think we'll do the rising sign, because I don't want to skip over that either. We'll do the big three, and then we'll go into Mercury. But, these two will bring you further than, you wouldn't, don't go see an astrologer first, but just go read about your sun and moon sign and see what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that Trinity kind of helps really connect it all and everything, and gives you a starting ground and stuff too. But another analogy I was just thinking of, like that whole receptivity of the sun's energy, and not just I'm not just talking about in a physical sense either, like everything that we just said, but like the whole like what can be an analogy for like the sun's receptivity, the moon's receptivity of the sun's energy in a more shadow way could be, say you have a very health conscientious, tip top shape, good genetics man, right? And then you have the woman, right, who's the receiver. They get together, they mate, but the woman doesn't take care of herself. She starts drinking, drugging, smoking, you're right, and it's polluting the womb. And therefore that's going to be indicative of what is going to be birth from that womb, most likely. That's kind of what you're passing along. And the same thing could go vice versa, right? So like, I'm saying that more so as like, oh, okay, sure, maybe you have a beneficial, no matter what, it's always beneficial in a certain sort of sense. Yes, I get we have, different domiciles of the planets and the exaltations and antithesis and depressions and stuff like that too. But no matter what, there's always some sort of positive creative energy that's being exuded. And where we're just saying how is, if you pollute, right, or you have an imbalance, and this is dependent on you as well. It's not just, oh, well, this is what I was given a shitty moon sign. Like, you can't think of it that way. It's you're deciding to go into, you're practicing, or you're deciding to go into the more shadow or, overly excessive or negative sides of that archetype in a sort of way, and you're deciding to play that out. So it's the same way where it's like, hey, well, maybe I need to clean up that, if I'm trying to birth something, especially if that there's something that you want to, take in and create and process something with it and have it manifest something on the outside, then yeah, you're going to have to clean up your act. You're going to have to clean up your response and your reaction and all the reactivity that you have to certain notions of things. And, a lot, like we just said, a lot of that comes into of that more unconscious side of it, but it is conscious. But that unconscious side of it, of how you're allowing those different thoughts stir up and dictate what emotions are available and stuff, and like that's why, like, it's just like, it's crazy, because like you could put that in any area of your life if you really look at your life and stuff like that. And this takes like a self-discipline to really look at yourself, and if there's something that you feel like it's just not going your way or some way, and if you could look at it in this sort of sense of, and maybe you can immediately apply the understanding of your chart, because if you have, if you are receptive and understanding of astrology in your own chart in this way, you could even do it right now and look at that one thing and really break it down and analyze it of, am I healthily, like, am I being healthy in the way that I'm receiving what's been coming to me? Do I have a part to play in why something is so resistant in my life or something in that way? And if you honestly come up with those answers, because the moon is asking, why the feeling, why is this coming up for me? And then it tends to psychoanalyze the feeling in that sort of sense, and that's the product we get from whatever it comes up with, and then we act upon that. So if you can really look at it in that sort of sense of maybe this example that you come up with in your head, just listen to this and then reflect it through the archetypes, and then even see the strengths of the archetypes and maybe how you can change your receptivity of it. That's how the astrology works for you. And that's how the moon astrology, but it's the moon, the sun, and everything else and stuff too, but that's just one focused area of how you can really see this kind of play out. And it's that empowerment through self-awareness and using the different archetypes in that way. And I just think it's crazy. It's amazing. Like I've even said on the podcast, like this is how I came into it, and it was like, all right, astrology is valid in that way. Like, and it's had a way of being beneficial in my life. Do I stick to it all the time? No. I'm human. We get distracted.
Yeah. I think that's right. Like that's an important thing, right? Like for example, I could have been spending this past week really internalizing what we're talking about now, or astrology in itself, which I do watch a lot of it most of the time. But I caught myself watching Joe Dispenza the other day and spending more time on the psychology and nothing. He even kind of by the way, he threw a shot at astrology. He's like, a planet doesn't cause you to feel this way and all that. And I'm like, yeah, we can have a debate on that. But I liked what he was talking about on how you could change certain things in a certain amount of days in psychology. So like, and Carl Jung was a psychologist. Like he didn't just use astrology, but it's one aspect, one tool, but you can put your mind in different places. But astrology is this metaphysical way. It's just a layer. You don't even need it. You don't need it. Like if you have good,
I think
I always thought about that. What? Go ahead.
I just saying. I think when that's the thing. It's like when people say that, it's like it's so easy to just be like, yo, like art imitates reality, like or reality imitates art. But I think it's the whole thing that. But the grand, let's just look at the grand architect of the universe, right? He's the artist, right? This is what's been set in place, and the art, his art is. Or their art, whatever you want to say, is imitating reality. And you could say vice versa and stuff too. That's all it is. It's not necessarily, yes, there may be, but like there may be, because we know how the moon actually affects physical things, and it affects the actual motions and the liquids and the tides, has to do with the blood and the plasma in the body and stuff, and our emotions and our hormones and stuff, and plays the same effect on the oceans. Yes, we can see that. We don't necessarily know, we know about the sun doing that, but we don't necessarily have it all figured out when it comes to do the other planets have that effect. Yes, in our own personal opinions, I think we say that there is some sort of way, whether it's it's visible or it's this really hidden deeper side that science cannot really describe in a sort of sense. But no matter what, that's enough to say, well, if if there's a reflection of this going on, like that's enough reason alone to give validity to astrology. So that's why I don't like that argument, because it's like, maybe some people do believe that, with the solar, I mean, the celestial bodies are actually affecting us and stuff like that. Well, I kind of urge people not to just take that road, but to also take what we've been saying about this whole thing of, as above, so below, that it's just kind of like, it's just this fractal patterning of what's happening in a certain way. We've constantly gone into that, where this way, if somebody presents that bullshit to you of being like, oh, you really think astrology and the planets? Well, no, hit them with a different perspective of it. I know anytime I've done that and I've hit people with that different perspective and being like, no, I'm not just thinking that the stars do shit like that. Then they've said, oh, okay, well, I could see that. And it's like, well, what the fuck?
Yeah, I got a few people with the tides thing and all that. It's like, you think of energy's there, and that's, I reference that Wi-Fi thing all the time, man. Like, our phones, we walk around but people are just so used to it now. I have internet. I can make a phone call from any fucking where. I can watch a movie while I'm on a bus or a plane. It's just like, oh yeah, it just happens to, an image and data just happens to just float through the nothingness and end up on your phone. And you could just, and no one even, it's just common thing now. And like, to think that can't be happening with nature itself, and that it's working in some coordinated way and all of that. Like, I think that's where the whole term order out of chaos came from. I think that like, it looks like chaos out there, but there is order out of it. Like that's where I think that whole masonry term came from. It's not, oh, we cause chaos magic and it's order. Like, that's maybe because that's a natural principle that out of chaos comes order, that maybe in an energetic way, maybe there is some law, and then you could use it for magic, and there's chaos magic, right? So like, I could see that being a thing. But at the end of the day, if you don't think it's orderly out there, then I think you have brain damage. I like, well, think about music. Not see that, how can music. And then what? Go ahead. Sorry, no, sorry. I thought you were done. Sorry. No, you're good. No, I'm just saying, look at music though. It's like, there's a lot of layered like an orchestra type of music. Is layered, and that could seem very chaotic. Music of the spheres, right?
But then when it's actually being perceived and everything in its entirety, and you're being able to view it, whereas if you just look at small individual parts, it could seem chaotic. But from look at sheet music perspective,
look at sheet music, like with all the dots and the and the notations and the time signatures and all that. Looks like absolute nutso chaos bullshit. And then you put it in front of an orchestra, and it's like this beautiful piece of music. And you're like, oh, wow, how is it out of that chaos on that piece of paper that you have this beautiful symphony, an orchestra? Yeah, no, it's a great. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, good call.
Yeah, you're seeing a more zoomed out perspective of things rather than just a zoomed in. And there's other senses at play. Like, whereas you're saying the sheet music, you're just visualizing that and stuff too. But then when you take the other senses, and now let's think about this in a cosmic order type of way, and where we can only be seeing a small fracture of something, and it looks chaotic and stuff, and we're using our visual senses and maybe whatever else, but there's other senses that we haven't tapped into too, and we're also not taking the perspective of zooming out of it to see the grander scale of it. And maybe we can't see the grander scale of it necessarily. We could have an intuitive intrinsic way of looking at it or something like that, or perceiving it in a sort of way and stuff, but it's not going to be fully known. I think that's the point. You figure out I got the workings of the universe.
You totally just got my brain going on the music thing, because now I'm thinking about a symphony, and like you think of your chart and you think of what the moon represents in an astrological archetype and symbolism. If a song is supposed to be like you can look at your chart as that sheet music, and your song is supposed to be played in a certain way, and all of a sudden there's this sour note in the symphony, and you can't think, you're like, this was supposed to be more of a sad song, or supposed to be more of this uplifting, track and this and that, or this is the part of my song that's supposed to be uplifting, or the part of my song that's supposed to be a lot of dissonance and a lot of noise and all that stuff. It's like being conscious of your, say, moon sign is being conscious of like, wait a minute, that attitude That's not what's supposed to be being played right now. Or this is the adjustment that I need to make. This is the tuning that I need to do to get my emotions or attitude in tune with the moment, to then play the piece of music that I need to be playing at this moment to make the best sounding symphony and the best, and the best self-serving and also collectively serving piece of music. So yeah, good call on bringing that
up.
And
what happens if you don't necessarily, you don't know how to really read music? Maybe you could get the gist of it and stuff like that, but maybe you're in the wrong octave. Maybe like you just said, you're not tuned to the right frequency or whatever and stuff, and therefore it sounds like shit. But I'm playing the note. Well, it sounds like shit. Oh, okay.
Well, on that point, you go to a person who does composition, aka in this position or in this situation, an astrologer, and you go, hey, I'm having trouble with my notation here. I'm reading my symphony or my orchestra. Can you tune this up and fix my, because when I was in music theory in high school, when you're learning classical music and you have to learn to do the notation and learn what rules there was this thing called where you have fifths in music, where you have the root note of the scale and then the fifth note up in the scale. And the rule is you couldn't go parallel to another root fifth. So like nowadays when metal guys or rock guys are doing power chords, that's a root 5 and that's a power chord, a 1-5. Highly illegal in classical music. Once the power chord goes another power chord, you've now broken all the rules. And I always wondered, was there a metaphysical reason why they made those rules? But that's a whole other discussion. But if you gave rock music to a classical artist, they would go, wait a minute, this is why your shit sounds like shit, or this is why it's not. If you just move this here to a third instead of the fifth, it's going to sound more harmonious. It's going to sound, or it's going to get you out of this part. Maybe you are in a dissonant part, but you need to get it more. You try to get more back in the melodious. Would that be a word? More melodic section. And that's how and so that's the way you could see Australia. And I've always said this, and I'm glad you brought up music, because music really is probably the greatest allegorical, symbolic way to explain everything in life, from the rhythm and the ebb and flow and the rhythm and what key that you're in, which is what emotion you're in, and who you're playing with. So you have the family or the people that you share things with, and then who's listening. So you have the people that you've shared your stuff with, and then what are you gaining from it? Are you gaining this personal integration from the music? And this all plays into everything else, and especially with astrology. And the guy, Pythagoras, right? He coined the term music of the spheres, which that's what he was talking about, and all the measurements and all that stuff of the way the planets move and the way the metric system and how everything evolved from him and all his mathematics, that there is this order out of chaos. And there's this beautiful, and that's why you get the word universe, or one verse or one song.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, you can have the very basic, what do they call that? Like basically you could have it where it sounds very, it sounds very simple, like a
cookie cutter,
like a 1980s Nintendo game fucking intro, or like something MIDI like that.
Or 8-bit.
Yeah, exactly. Or it can be very layered and complex and
Hans Zimmer.
Yeah, like that's
interstellar soundtrack,
harmonizing going on. There's so much more to it, and that can help personify things, where it's like, yeah, you could get that. And it's so funny because the moon also deals, is represented by the moon as well. The moon, music, the
movement of
dancing,
ebbs and flows, tides, ins and outs, and that's, and if you really use it for today's music, basically what it does mostly, and I'm saying more on the mainstream, because there's amazing music. Like if you go look, music's amazing. Like everyone's like, music sucks nowadays. It's like, you're just not looking. It doesn't suck. It's just what's on the mainstream or what's pushed out into normal, minded people who don't want to actually go seek, substantial and good art and all of that. But what's pushed out on the mainstream is this cyclic, this very, repetitive and detached, but like also just this like real one-dimensional emotional, this is the emotion, whether it's wet ass pussy or or country music, I fucked my dog because my wife left me, like whatever it is, this real one-dimensional, like it's almost like, is the way because I listen to music in a specific way, and I'm gonna relate this back to the astrology or the moon sign. But if you go read your moon sign and you go, I'm a Cancer moon, I'm supposed to be sensitive, I'm supposed to be about family, I'm seeing it in this very one-dimensional factor, and then I've now taken that, and now the way I listen to the song of astrology or how I interpret that energy is now I start integrating that one-dimensional view. With music, same thing. If something is only giving me one emotion or a couple thoughts to deal with, whether it's drugs, banging bitches, this, that, and it's one dimensional, like it's just this, here's a character placed in a song and I'm going to listen to it. It sinks in and you start imitating that. That's why the world is the way it is. Like music is that powerful. But when you have an orchestra and maybe there's not as many lyrics or it's more musically driven and there's more of an adventure and there's ups and downs and dynamics like real life is, that does something to the mind because you start to think your own images. Nothing's telling you to think of this guy in this car selling drugs, fucking your bitch and whatever. And you're not getting, the images are so important, right? If we're talking about manifestation and visualization, what does the music you listen to make you visualize? And you're sending that out, and now you're adopting all of that shit. And now think of the astrology, the metaphor of that, going back to it is how are you listening to the music, or what's your interpretation of what's good in that music, and what images are you getting from your sun sign, from your moon sign, or how your chart is laid out and all of that. And yeah, so this was a good turn, the unexpected turn of conversation, Gio. Good job.
Yeah.
My brain fucking firing off.
Let the flow happen.
When you do that, my Gemini fucking hard on just slowly rises. Just yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. That's the name of the game.
Mental fucking boner.
But yeah, just to reinforce a lot of what we talked about, and just when you look at astrology, representations of the moon, we've discussed a lot of it, but it's the mother, emotions, the interpersonal, subconscious, the unconscious, subconscious, fertility, nurturing, incarnation and resurrection. We'll get into why and all this stuff too eventually, but the womb, the receiver, water, home and roots, the capacity to feel, ego, the processing, reflect on emotions, qualities of the depth of depth and soul. So, with that too, I just want to also say here, as an ancient astrologer had said, Valens, that the moon, and this is something I want to bring it up because there's a lot of representations that he said of the moon where you look at that and you'd probably be like, I feel like that's a different planet, but we can kind of like go into why, that would be the moon in our own manner. But so the moon is born from the reflection of the solar light, and possessing a counterfeit light signifies in a nativity a man's physical life. Doesn't have to be necessarily man, but the body, the mother, conception, which would form, appearance, goddess, living together or lawful union, nurse, older siblings, housekeeping, the queen, mistress of the house, possessions, fortune, city, gathering of masses, gains, expenditures, home, boats, travel, wanderings, the left eye, the stomach, breasts, the breath, the spleen, membranes, and marrow. It also is represented by silver, pearl, moonstones, glass, gems, and then also nocturnal. It's nocturnal. Then you have, it's also the color green, but also white and salt. So is there anything of those in there that stood out to you? Because I know for me, when I saw it, I was like, oh, that's crazy. And then I was like, that's Mercury. Like a lot of it was in there. Was
some
like,
of it, yeah.
Mercury.
Well, I could have connected a bunch, but the way I thought about it, and this is traditional astrology and ancient astrology, but the way I would kind of take all of that is that sounded like combinations of what the moon can bring out, through being aspected with other planets, where the moon is being hit with certain energies where it's going to bring out, like it's a combination factor more than anything else. But what caught me the most, and I've been a moon child my whole life, I've been nocturnal my whole life. I have moon in the 8th house, conjunct Jupiter in Cancer, where the moon is more powerful than my sun if you were to really kind of do the math. that I'm more ruled by the moon sign because it's in a stronger position, and it has its exalted planet Jupiter conjunct in Cancer, and it's in the eighth house. So nighttime, deep in the scorpionic cave and all that. And so nocturnal is what the key word there that I'm like, yeah, that's moon. It's nighttime. It's sitting with the inner energies and observing them. And I think with someone like me who has moon in Cancer, they're going to be more highly aware and able to do that, bring those conscious things up. Where someone with moon in Leo or even moon in Pisces, I'll say. I mean, but the fact that it's a water sign, I still feel like you're more in touch. You're more aware of emotions than, say, a fire sign or an earth sign, because they're not going to want to analyze it. Fire sign wants passion and fun. They don't want to sit there. And a moon in Leo is not going to be like, I feel this way. It's going to be like, I feel this way. And now I'm going to tell you how I feel. And whatever, like they're going to egoically, like whatever. They're not going to sit and analyze, be like, how was I wrong? They're going to be like, no, how was I right? Even if I was wrong, fuck that. Right. We're like us as water sign moons and all that. We're going to sit there nocturnally, sit at night, and all that stuff's going to come up, and we're going to observe it and become more conscious of it. We have that opportunity more, I think, than other moon signs. But yeah, all that was interesting. I would say I'd stick with my whole thing on. It sounded like aspected parts of the moon.
Yeah, that's kind of how I took it too, because I mean, I also took it in this sense, especially when it dealing with, let's see, some of the things that it said, the body, possessions, fortune, what else? Where was it? Yeah, mainly those ones too. I was like, oh, okay, well, the moon's home in Cancer, its antithesis is Capricorn, and it's exalted in Taurus, and it depresses in Scorpio. So a lot of things that I just said now, when I said the body, possessions, fortune, makes me think of the exaltation of the moon, which would be in Taurus. Which would be very Venus-like.
Right.
Yes, exactly. So like that's why, and I could see that too. But if we're thinking about that's, in that archetypal way where, the moon has this receptive, nurturing and mothering in the womb in order to create and this form of conception inside the womb that then creates a certain form and stuff like that. It can have that whole thing of doing with obviously the body and possessions as well, because you're also not just doing that with a physical thing, but it also, even ideas, and even what you value and what you're going to nurture and stuff like that too. And you can replicate those things. You can accumulate those things even more through that process and stuff. The other things that
security, by the way, from those possessions, it makes you feel at home when you possess things. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Perfect. Yes, I forgot about that. That aspect of it.
Yep. But when you're secure, you're stable, stability, Taurus.
Yep, and that's exactly what we're talking about. And I think a lot of it derives around wanting to, as far as the moon and any sort of feeling that we have of wanting to be stable in our life is very dependent on our emotions, I think. Yeah. But the other things that, our attitudes, and which, we're going to process, our attitudes on things because of our perception, a lot of times because of how it makes us feel, a lot of things. But the other things that were in there, that everything else, I was like, oh yeah, I could see that as moon up. But the other stuff that was in there was like the whole travel, wanderings, a city, gathering of the masses.
You know what I get from real quick? You know what I get from the traveling is that the moon travels so quickly throughout the zodiac every month that it travels. So the moon likes to be on the move. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I also got from the whole travel thing was that like, it's like, and because also it is, the moon is boats too, because of Cancer, but it's also, and because of the waters, but the boat traverses the waters and wandering at the mercy of the waters and the winds and stuff. And those are all things that are, you're kind of, that's your vessel. And, you're
sailing the tides, the tides are going to come regardless of what you want them to be. And then your boat has to, right.
Yeah. And also thinking about like the whole ability to establish roots or home wherever you go, there's always going to be the necessity of that quality to kind of happen. any sort of which way that you go. If you're going to move, maybe the move is against your comfortability, and even is really hard on your, it's hard based on your astrology and based on your moon side and everything. What the hell was that? But no matter what, you're going to find a way to tap into something. And there's going to be an aspect, whether you realize or not, there's going to be an aspect of that moon that's going to help bring energy and power into, okay, how do I establish my roots and home here as well too? How do I create that comfort and nurture myself in this environment and stuff too? That's the other thing. The moon also represents the overall environment too. I feel like, like that's where, if you want to metaphysically look at it, when it comes to like the whole sun and the moon and the earth and everything and stuff, which this breaks down into all different ancient mythos as well too. But it's like, that's the sun, that light. We talked about the sun, and we talked about what gives the sun its power and stuff. And it's more of this thing that we don't see and everything. But then you have this form of the sun and its light, and it contains these creative qualities and everything and stuff too. But something needs to be put into a container, right? It needs, and this is where you could play into the whole understanding of the moon Saturn matrix thing too, where it's like the moon. And if you look at it, just not just the moon, its planet, but the moon as a representation and having its own celestial sphere and its own workings in our universe.
The lunar principle.
Exactly. So it's being this environment of which it is allowing for this propagation. And if you want to connect it with Saturn and saying that whole Saturn moon matrix, well, you can really see how it's like, well, Saturn represents what? Stability, form, those things where the moon is that receptive thing, and it's together and gives us that. Yes, it gives us that physical form, that physical life for us to be able to for us to be able to exist and to perceive things that exist.
And it's funny you bring this up because you have the Tropic of Cancer, you have the Tropic of Capricorn, and Plato actually called them the two gates. And he called the Cancer the gate of descension, and Capricorn the gate of ascension. Where Cancer, you drop in and become more, you receive a body, you receive a life, you are born and receive these things. And then the Capricorn energy is there to ascend out of the body and to go back up to the top. They go back up to the top of the mountain and all that. That it is the two gates. And it's ironic that
that plays hand
you
in
have
hand
the tropics. Yeah. That those are the two, I feel like those are like, the housing spheres of the sun of the ecliptic. It is the matrix. The sun is within the bounds of Cancer and Capricorn.
Yeah. And I think that's why when you look at a lot of the ancient mythos and depictions and stuff like that, this is why you're constantly seeing this reverence to the or the horns, or the horned moon, like it, or that those things, which a lot of people be like, oh no, it's Saturn, oh no, it's the moon. Either way, it's always depicted as some sort of thing of fertility, and everything that we just talked about goes in line with that and stuff too. So it's like even the whole thing, or just one example would be Isis. It's the mother goddess of magic and healing, but it was also known as a Set, which means queen of the throne, right? But it was always depicted with either a throne headdress, a vulture headdress, which was more representative of Mut, or the horned disc, which is Hathor. But that's the thing, like, when we look at some of these too. Yeah, exactly. The crescent moon, it's all those mythos and shit. Like, but the thing we have to look at, we can't get focused on, well, is Isis the moon, or is Artemis the moon, or is this? It's not necessarily that. It's that they've embodied these certain natures. A lot of gods and goddesses assimilated many earlier known deities and forces and forces of natures and took on those traits. So that whole thing of, wearing the horned disc, which is Hathor, which is known as Isis, but Isis took, more than one thing and and embodied that energy and shit too. Well, Hathor could have been the embodiment of the Capricornian Cancer nature stuff, or the Taurian, nature of mixed with the moon, shit like that.
Yeah,
So
symbols are multi-layered.
Yeah, you can't get too heavily focused on who's who. It's what are they representing and why, and how are they representing it?
And that's the dangerous part of symbolism and trying to decipher, is that when you're calling out, say, a conspiracy, you're calling out this, or you're calling out that, or in religion, with us going through the Dark Ages, there, through all the symbolic and stories and the mythos and all of that, there's so many different ways you can decipher, and that doesn't mean one's wrong and one's right. It means that it's being tethered to a certain lens of seeing it that way as well. So there could be multi-layered meanings to a symbol or to a god or goddess. When you were saying Isis, I immediately thought Isis, Ra, and El, or you have Israel, and you have Isis being the moon, Ra being the sun, and then El being Saturn, or the electricity. And because Saturn was worshipped as the second sun, so you could see, or the sphere of, we're in the sphere of Saturn and all of that. So that's why you'd have the mother, the father, and then the elder.
Exactly. I mean, and this is why I'm bringing up Isis, because it plays such a big part of understanding in more of the ancient psychological way of, the importance of the moon. But, Isis is also wife and sister of Osiris, the mother of Horus and Set, right? Mm-hmm. But Manetho, right? He was a Hellenistic Egyptian priest of the Ptolemaic kingdom. And he was probably, from what we've dated, is probably the first to start associating Isis with the moon in the 3rd century BC. And that was later reinforced by Plutarch. But so when you go into this, when you go into Dendro, which is like a temple of Hathor, right? I said Isis is represents Hathor as well, that goddess. Then Hathor is an ancient Egyptian goddess was known as more of like the primeval form who all others derive from in that sort of way. And what did I just say before about the moon? It's the environment, and that's kind of what Hathor represents. Hathor's also the daughter of Ra, or sometimes even said as the Eye of Ra, and she was personified as principles of love, beauty, music, dancing, fertility, and pleasure. A lot of things that are very, moon. Taurus shit,
Well, and Taurus Venusian, but Taurus relating to the moon's exaltation. Yeah.
Yep. And in this temple, right, Dendra, on the ceiling of it, there's this depiction that there's 14 figures leading up to the Eye of Ra. And each one shows a different deity with a different headdress and stuff. And you can tell which one each one is and stuff in that sort of sense. But it's what it's representing is the myth of Osiris, where in the myth of Osiris was dismembered into 14 parts. The first Egyptian calendars were lunar based. So Osiris was a moon god in ways, and the temple depicts the moon changes and the lunar phases. In the myth of Osiris, Osiris lived till he was 28. So it's the 28 years life of Osiris was the moon cycle, and the 14 parts that were all cut up were the 14 phases of the moon from the full moon and the new moon. So, and it's also, there's a lot of the whole Osiris being killed on the full moon, and it's more so like a resurrection practice concerning the spiritual alchemy of everything that we were just talking about before, of transmuting the ego into the spiritual self, but through this certain awareness of our conception and perception of what we're taking in and how we're doing. Yes, there's a lot, obviously there's a lot that probably was very spiritual and mystical and stuff too. But like you were just saying too, that goes into that whole Trinity thing. If you want to think of in the creative process of, as above, so below. We said that whole thing, the sun, the moon, and yeah, you could throw astrology in there and think the rising too, but you have Osiris, Isis, and Horus. In the Mesopotamian culture, you had Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. So why were these things constantly revered? And one of the things that I just found interesting is that the mythos always, all different cultures always end up connecting in some sort of way. Like the main factor in this, when it comes to all the other ones too, with all the moon goddesses, it's always fertility. And that's the thing that we were saying. It's not just about, having babies and making, it's not just that. It's not the only thing.
No, that's the Venusian principle.
Trying to be fertilized.
Yeah, the pleasure and the goody feelings that you get from all of it, and even the sexual acts and all that. That's the Taurian or Venusian part of it.
And I think those were more ritualistic.
Yeah, right, Luciferian too. But like the fertility part of it, or the mothering part of it, is the moon supports it and makes it happen and makes it a thing, and nurtures the situation of what's being nurtured through that pleasure or through that Venusian principle. And that's why the moon is exalted in Taurus. And it's funny you brought up the moon, or in one of those mythos you were just you were talking about how you said one was representing of the single eye, right? And Osiris was connected to it, and you have the word Iris in Osiris.
Yep. Yeah. Yep, exactly. Isis, which is represents Hathor as well, is also known as, who Isis is, the wife and sister of Osiris, was known as the Eye of Ra.
Yeah. And as we go on with all these, I really love the theological and mythological part of all these.
And that's just a small fraction.
Yeah, I know that's
Artemis,
not even touching the surface. That's just barely skimming it.
Yeah.
I have something you had said before when you were talking about the environment, right? Because that's where all this came from. So I have a book by Amy Herring called Astrology of the Moon, and I was going through it. And there was a section that immediately when you said it, I thought of this, and it was a metaphor, and I got to read it real quick. And here's for anybody watching the video. That's the book. But I love her work, by the way. I have a few other books that she has, Aspects in Astrology, and there's another one I have. But I got to read this real quick because when you were talking about the environment. So it says, for the moon, there's a section called the private self. And it says, if you can imagine yourself as a house with your various astrological parts represented by all the rooms typically found in a house, you might imagine your ascendant as the front door and foyer, and maybe your sun would be the living room or family room. Perhaps Mercury would be your home office, and Venus the porch swing or the love seat, or wherever you might enjoy socializing in a typical home. The moon, however, would be your bedroom, or maybe even your bedroom closet. No matter how outgoing we consider ourselves to be, our moon represents the innermost part of us. It is our private selves. It is inherently a vulnerable spot of which we are protective. We could even call it our inner child. We only tend to reveal this part of ourselves to the people we trust, just like we might not bring everybody we know into our bedroom. We may say that someone wears their heart on their sleeve, but the moon is more than just demonstrations of emotion. Hits on what you said before, Gio. It represents the inner self, and everyone has a way to protect the inner self, even if they seem to be very, very outgoing or revealing. When we are truly seeing someone on this deeper level, it's not just that they're telling us their secrets, but that we see their vulnerability, whether it's through them revealing something private or feeling comfortable enough to cry in front of us, or even sharing a personal creation or controversial opinion with us. Therefore, the moon is always the part of us that is a little bit shy, not necessarily out of lack of confidence, and that it reveals itself only upon the condition of some sort of trust, implied or expected between people. But the room thing, I go, oh yeah, that's and it's funny. I allowed a lot of fucking people in my bedroom. Yeah. And I'm thinking like, oh, there's my Cancer moon. Come in the house. Come in the house. Yeah. Well, and now it is completely opposite. Now that's, especially me, at least even being in Florida. But regardless, I did allow probably not. I wouldn't say exactly the wrong people, but I allowed people to enter my space too easily. I think that's the metaphor I would use, or analogy of if I were to be analyzing my past self and how I used to act and how and think about it, right? So think about anybody out there, think about your bedroom and who you allow in there. What kind of people, what kind, what do you allow in your bedroom? And if you could use that as, so in your consciousness, what do you allow in that personal bedroom? It was a great metaphor. And when you were saying, the environment, I immediately thought of that house metaphor when I was reading it before.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, I think that's a great way to look at it too, because it's just the thing, like it is going to be those private parts of yourself, those aspects of even just the fact of coming down to turn off, you need to have that reboot, you need to rest, you need to nurture yourself in that sort of way, the dream state, all those things that are represented by the moon as well, but also your bedroom. It's like those are things that are going to be kickers to how you end up thinking, feeling, and acting and out in the world and everything and stuff too. So there's a lot of fuel that can come from it, more than we may want to acknowledge at times. And this is why we're, also showing the importance, yes, of each and every planet. But, this is the big thing about the moon, and this would be what you would be considering tapping into the divine feminine. And it's not about being a little bitch, it's not about that women are just emotional, and it's not about that. It's the fact of that there's more of an attention and an awareness to this part of yourself, to the emotions and stuff like that. But we want to give it the right attention, and everybody should figure out how they haven't been, or where they do good with giving the attention to it, and learn how to kind of empower that side of them through this more constructive way of looking at emotions versus feelings and stuff, and the how feelings can produce emotions and stuff, where they're coming from, and how we have to change our perception, but also just how we're actually processing those emotions. We may just want to veg out or something like that. That may not necessarily be the kicker. Like, I know for me, and we could get into that, but like, that's something I could see straight away through, the my sun to my moon and everything. Like, it's like the energy of Taurus wants to come in and wants to ground and stabilize and likes the comfort stuff as well. But say if something goes awry, now my moon wants to get, maybe naturally just wants to get lost in the emotion, the feeling. But on the downside, it could be in a sort of way that either gets lost at a point where there's no processing of it, there's no really understanding any sort of thing, and it's not doing nothing, and you could get lost in this sort of shit, or the fact that you get lost so far that it just comes to just hiding away, floating down below the surface and everything, and just taking on water, shutting everything out, and overly indulging in the comforts and stuff like that too. But also, there is a beneficial process. You just have to think of the situation, whatever it is that's sparking those things to come up, and no one way is going to be how you should handle something. There's going to be multiple different ways how to handle certain situations, and there's going to be parts of, there's going to be more parts of your sun that's going to or other parts of your planets and stuff like that are going to need to come into play more, to outdo maybe some parts of that whole moon archetype. And maybe you need to reinforce the moon archetype more in some times and areas, but you're only going to be able to do that if you have this sort of awareness of the power of it and all the archetypes and the elements and the metaphysical principles of being able to work with this shit.
Yeah, and I think on that note, I think I think that's about it, right? I think that this is a great first lunar episode, but we want to really hit on, we told, we from the start, we want to be hitting on the basics and our own thoughts and things that we've come up with each of the planets, and then eventually the signs and the houses and all that. But you have the idea now. And
yeah,
as we go along, next would be the ascendant and the rising and the chart ruler, and then what that means, but then Mercury and the rest, and the whole pantheon of the astrological gods, and what that really means in all our lives, and showing you guys, how we've integrated this into our understanding of it all, and how it has empowered us. That's the whole point. It's not to sell you some astrology reading. It's not to tell you to believe in something. It's pure observation of, hey, this thing has empowered me fully in the way I experience reality in my life. And the fact that it has given me so much benefit that I must share this with people. And I think that's what astrology does. And a lot of this stuff does, is that you start to realize how much you have benefited and how much you've changed coming down this path, and how useful it all really is, as long as you're willing to digest it and allow it to really hit the mind. And then also what it does to the mind as well. Like it expands your mind. It brings wonder back into it, but then it also gets you thinking differently. And it completely shifts the lens of the mandala of what it is we call life and how we experience it all. So that, yeah, I think that I've said everything that I've wanted to say about it all, at least for now. And we could go into, different things for, anyone who's anticipating another lunar episode. We would love to touch up on the lunation cycle and what that means with even other planets, and, how the cycle of the moon is built into basically all astrological transits. There's more theology and mythology to go over. So yeah, I think this is good.
Yeah, but I think this is a great way, like, especially, taking a step back and breaking each one down and giving it its rightful respect through the process. But I just want to tell the viewers, like, just if you're watching this and you're on this journey of this series, like, I would definitely say meditate on your chart, or try to at least have it available, and try to be able to look at these things as we talk about it and meditate on a little bit. Because I know for even myself, like, yeah, I know my chart, but like taking the time to look at each one of these areas and then focus on, okay, the moon, and then see what's playing with that. And then the next thing is see what's playing with that. It's refreshing me maybe on some things, or just teaching me new things, even about myself and my own processes and things I need to do and shit like that. So, I mean, this could be very beneficial for you. Like, so, and, a lot of times you got to take a course for this shit and stuff like that, and dish out money and everything and stuff. But no, here it is. Take your time with it. It's here. It's available. It's going to be available. If anything, just hit the like button. That's it.
All right. Well, hey, we thank everybody for listening. As always, it's not about what you think, but it's about how you think here. And we're here to expand the consciousness of ourselves and anybody listening, and hope to have more guests. But for now, we don't know if we'll have any more astrologers come on and all that. We'll try to arrange something, because it's always fun to have more people. But if not, then you'll get me and Gio, and we'll be giving our philosophical and intellectual implications on this stuff. And hopefully you get something from it. So once again, we thank you. And until next time.